Cool. Right. Good morning, everyone. Lovely to see you. Thank you for that introduction. So my name is Judith Ricketts. I'm an artist, serious games developer, and ECR in games art at the University of Brighton. My practice is thematically centred on the spatial memory of the city's built environment as an intersectional backdrop to examine data as a means to make interactive mobile serious games in immersive spaces or real-world spaces with a focus on storytelling for social change. I often work with data of Brighton in association with the transatlantic slave trade. Questions raised in my practice relate to ways in which human-computing interaction can be employed as a strategic tool to engage audiences with difficult subjects. Serious games, for me, is storytelling about unremembered stories. From this media, some of the media I use is photograph, moving image, facial detection, motion detection, augmented reality, virtual reality, depending on the nature of the question that I'm trying to answer. My approach to teaching is very much about having games artists use the city as a place to gather data. It's really important that I narrow their reference points. For me, using archives and visual practice to bring historic stories and other stories into view is essential. It's a way of beginning to address disconnections, misrepresentations in stories about the diasporas in Europe and European history. Today, I'm reflecting on ideas of returning to learning, inclusive coding practice for midlife, non-traditional students, essentially myself. I was particularly drawn to the first question, or the first provocation, which was very much about challenging who gets to talk about knowledge and who gets to produce it. For me, this is particularly relevant in the area of history, technology, and academia, spaces that I currently occupy. The provocation encouraged me to reflect on my own practice and my own positionality as I engage with ideas that surface in these spaces, i.e., as a creator and researcher, how do I define and produce knowledge through my own work? What theories and concepts, European or non-European, manifest from the intersectional nature of my practice? In what ways do my positionality and conditioning in the academic space shape what I consider to be valid versus a marginalized narrative? How can my practice help surface new feminist perspectives from my embodied experience, both as marginalized and academic? These provocations called me to critically examine the practice and the context and to recognize my own agency in this process. So in summary, a marginalized body as in academic space and agency in manifesting change. To set the context for the presentation, I looked at intersectional challenges, stability and sustainability, and contextual barriers. For me, as an older person, a single mother seeking a career change between the periods of 2020 to 2023, so fairly recent, stability and sustainability was motivated by a real need to earn a stable income. So I enrolled on a coding bootcamp in 2021. Quite timely. Contextual barriers I faced included menopause symptoms, ageism, housing insecurity, financial insecurity, imposter syndrome, perfectionism, and undiagnosed learning difficulties. Some stats. So for me, the contextual barriers were, this idea that insomnia can impair daily function. Research indicates that approximately 25% of women going through menopause leave the workplace, citing impacts and symptoms as major factors. Only 18% of women going through the menopause reported that their workplace offered support, and 82% of them felt that the workplace did not adequately accommodate or understand ageism. Research indicates that overall age discrimination has a number of negative effects on women over 40 changing into to tech careers, including it can make it difficult for women to find entry-level roles, even if they have the necessary experience. It means that they are more likely to be paid less than their younger male counterparts in the same job. Outrageous. Are less likely to be promoted into senior roles, are more likely to experience age discrimination in tech industry based as opposed to women under 40, so over 40, under 40. In terms of housing insecurity, women over 50 are more likely to be evicted than men over 50. In terms of financial insecurity, women over 40 have a lower retirement savings. I realise this is completely biased because quite a few people don't have retirement savings at the moment, and face financial insecurity when seeking career changes in later life. For me, the imposter syndrome is a triple-edged sword. In academia, male-dominated fields, and wanting to go into a tech, which is also a male-dominated field, compounded by underrepresentation. The study also showed that black women in STEM fields are more likely to leave their jobs due to imposter syndrome. Perfectionism. What can I say? Research indicates that perfectionism has negative impacts on learning technical skills. It says here for women, but I think it has an across-the-board impact. Undiagnosed learning difficulties. Evidence shows that adults who struggle with undiagnosed learning difficulties, like ADHD, for example, and processing issues that cause barriers for learning complex skills. And so for me, all of this in the context, in that period, made it very difficult to, extremely difficult to shape my overall experience of learning to code. In my own teaching practice, I feel it's, I don't know students until maybe the end of the first project. So it takes about 12 weeks to really get to know students. And what I would like to propose is this, the idea that in the government coding bootcamp that I entered, which was designed for underrepresented groups, I was fundamentally lost in that system. It didn't speak to me as an individual, and it didn't speak to my circumstances. So I got my head down, and I struggled through it. This experience of learning to code, with no real consideration of who I was. I really think there has to be a better way. In fact, it was a miserable experience. This opportunity to present has given me an opportunity to think about what could have made a difference in retrospect. And for me, there's pluses here. So if I were to think about, okay, how can my practice help to surface feminist practice from the embodied experience as a marginalised person, academic and student? And the first thing is self-advocacy. But in order to do that, you have to acknowledge where you are. I had no idea where I was in this process. It just felt like a fog, compounded by the lockdown, which was a fog. We talked about post-lockdown and pre-lockdown and understanding and trying to remember things in this period. And added all of that in the process, I think was difficult to really acknowledge where I was in the process in order to ask for more, effectively more help. Speaking up in spaces where there was limited inclusive practices that could have made a difference. I argue that in government-funded spaces designed to increase diversity, equality and inclusion in tech, which have no exclusive element part of the trio, is effectively masquerading as inclusive spaces, because they only go so far in that aim. I'd also argue for flexibility in inclusive teaching practices and environments which, as a means of enabling women facing midlife career transitions to upskill successfully into tech or other spaces, and to encourage underrepresented groups in those spaces. For me, in retrospect, focusing on progress over time-bound outcomes would have been a better approach. You know, focusing on progress can help students to learn from their mistakes. When students are focused on time-bound outcomes, they are less likely to take risks and to try new things, and even have time to learn from their mistakes. Given the opportunity to focus on progress, students are more likely to experiment and to learn from their mistakes. This is a model to a certain extent I use in art practice, but I'm within the university, but it certainly wasn't a model used in coding practice. Blackwell found that students who focus on a growth mindset, so students who think that intelligence is learned over time, are more likely to learn from their mistakes than students who have a fixed mindset, i.e. think that intelligence is fixed. The growth mindset students were more likely to persist in the face of a challenge and to achieve higher grades. So in summary, for me, some of the interventions that would have helped me progress was less time-rigid outcomes, focusing on myself as an older mother and understanding where I was, requesting adjustments like visual aids. I am highly visual in terms of my learning, and that wasn't part of the process. Flexible schedules, additional sessions or support, asking for inclusive practices would have helped me in that process. So, moving forward, where am I today? I have a very, very early tech startup, PhD candidate potential. That's if my supervisors haven't been scared off. You know, acknowledging that I know a hell of a lot is really important. You know, that process really brought home my, I want to call it a failure syndrome. I think that if you think that you are not doing as well as other students, or you're not working as fast or in the same way, that something's not right, you are failing. Something wasn't right, but I wasn't failing. I needed to do things differently. Finding space to develop what I know is really important. Homing and defining what I do best. Bringing people together and evicting the naysayers. It's really important. There are so many naysayers all the time. I think it's the highest level of kind of negativity in the field of tech associated with academia I've ever experienced in my life. And I worked in the City of London with architects. So, yeah, spending time looking at my own path and not comparing myself to others, which is a killer of joy. And so the final outcome here, shameless plug, thank you. I do have some work which is going to be distributed in November. I'm looking for testers, etc. Thank you.